Hey y'all, I'm Ash Vampire, and you're watching Shoring Up. This week's Shoring Up, we'll get right to it, is going to be about Princess Principal. It's a show that, when I initially heard about it, was going to be one of the only shows from that season that people were saying was any good. And but weirdly enough, to go along with that, I didn't really see any, postings of the characters or any sort of cuts from the show. So I went in kind of blind with this one. But to jump right into it, Princess Principal is a show set in a steampunk world, a 19th century fantasy setting, as it were. And to accomplish that, the visuals in this show are fantastic, particularly the character design and the costume design really come through as one of the strongest elements in this show and really selling you the time period that the show is set in. But on top of that, in order to really get that sense of time and place that the show is trying to convince you of, it has to have excellent sound design, and it does. Everything feels heavy and gritty and dirty and guttural almost. It really does feel like most of the technology in this show is kind of very early stages, early stage internal combustion engine or anything like that. Particularly the cars, the guns, everything sounds very down to earth, and it has a lot of weight to it, and it adds to a lot of the realism that the show is trying to give you in terms of the setting. And those two elements of the visuals and the sound really come together and make it an incredibly cohesive experience. I personally think that's one of the strongest selling points in the show, just how cohesive all of the individual elements from a visual and audio standpoint really come through and make it a fantastic experience. Additionally, even though Princess Principal is a great show visually and audibly, it can't just rely on those to, those are not its only laurels here. The show is also very narratively well constructed. Each episode is out of chronological order. At the beginning of each one, there is a slide card that tells you a case file number, which is then supposed to clue you in as to, when did this event take place in relation to everything else that I've seen so far. On top of this, or really on the writing on the back of this, it really helps each episode of the show feel incredibly tightly paced and very, very episodic, which really helps because you don't really have a sense of what the plot and what the end is going to be right up until the last second, which is an absolute must for a spy thriller. They really understand how to construct a story that is interesting narratively to go along with the aesthetic. And on top of that, by ordering everything completely out of chronological order, it really helps the overarching plot throughout the show feel largely out of the main characters' hands, which it kind of is. These are the characters that are on the ground, right? These are the characters that are in the midst of the conflicts. They are not the, characters involved in the political intrigue side of the plot, which really helps that you are sort of trying to figure out what's going on behind the scenes along with these characters. It really helps with your engagement with not only the show as a whole, but each individual character. That it builds a lot of pathos with the characters by having everything out of order. It's a fantastic structural choice because by virtue of them being spies, they don't emote very much, or at least they don't emote to each other and then by extension to you very much. So a lot of what they have to accomplish in terms of, character relatability or, character pathos, like I said, has to come from the structure. And it's a fantastic use of, anti-chronology. It's a fantastic choice on the side of the directing team. In addition to each episode being incredibly tightly paced and very episodic in nature, the show really values your intelligence as an audience member. Not very much is revealed by monologue or conversation between characters. And I personally appreciate this a lot. I don't like hand-holding in a show. I'm not an idiot. I can figure out what's going on by inferring a lot. But not only does it, respect the audience in this way, it actually uses this to establish and develop its characters. By nature of being spies, a lot of what they are doing they don't talk about to really anybody, and it really sells you on this sense of freneticism, because as they are just doing things, you are trying to figure out why it is they're doing stuff. You're trying to get into the minds of these characters as spies. It's an excellent way to engage the audience. And speaking of engagement, by not hand-holding you through the, little bit more complex natures of these plots, it requires your engagement. The show, in order to understand it, you have to be invested, you have to be paying attention to what is going on. It's really great for that. Like, just to really grasp the show, you are sucked in. It's a great way to really sell a narrative, I think, and I wish more shows would do it. I wish more shows would not monologue about their plot or go to extensive lengths to explain the inner workings of how things are, going inside a character's head. It's a fantastic way to not only, keep your audience engaged, but also to, without any dialogue, develop how these characters think and act. And my last talking point with Princess Principal is going to be the Prince and the Pauper side plot. Or really, it's not even the side plot. The Prince and the Pauper narrative is definitely the underlying overarching story element to Princess Principal. I think it's perfectly welcome. I enjoyed it a whole lot. And I heard a lot of people who I talked to who didn't enjoy it all that much, who thought it was kind of unnecessary or not handled all that well. I don't think so. I think it really adds a lot of depth and layer to the characters, and specifically Angie. It adds tons of context for how she is as a person and everything she does and says. And I think that by having that in there and being revealed in its entirety in the very end of the show, you get a complete recontextualization of everything that has transpired. And it really adds to rewatchability enjoyment when you can go back and, now knowing, those elements, you catch tiny little tidbits of things that you had missed before. And I think that's an incredible thing to be able to not only encourage, rewatch, but, to get a new sense of enjoyment out of going back through a show, for a second time. Okay, that's going to be it for Princess Principal. And I know that this, seems pretty short considering that we had an almost 20-minute video discussing Shiki. But it's kind of funny, when you're reviewing a show that you really enjoy and that you think is really good, you tend to actually have less to say about it, I think, because when a show does everything right, when all of its elements, like in Princess Principal, come together and are in a good, cohesive unit, it is significantly more difficult to isolate certain elements by virtue of that cohesion. When something is bad for particular reasons, those particular reasons really stand out, and you can pinpoint them and you can pick them apart and really assess why they are bad or why they don't fit. Whereas, in a good show, like I said, that just isn't there. But I don't want to, make you think that because I'm not talking about Princess Principal all that much that it is not worth watching. It definitely is, and I really encourage anybody who is interested in watching Princess Principal to definitely go do so. I give Princess Principal a 7. Catch you on the flip side.